How's Noah, everybody? It's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By Podcast, episode 101, Introduction to Conor McGregor versus the Habibalicious one, my Khabib, Mr. Nurmagomedov himself. And you can just assume that the whole episode is going to be about that. It's going to be eaten up by Khabib versus Conor talk. We'll do some news first because there's some hilarious news to talk about, but only really one story today. You remember how last week we talked about Dustin Poirier and Nate Diaz campaigning to get a £160 title fight? It was sort of like a, let's get Nate Diaz in a title fight. He's not really deserving of a title fight, but at least we can put a fucking belt on him and then put two belts on the match with Conor if we ever need to. Moreover, I don't think there's anyone actually arguing that Poirier versus Nate isn't a very strong fight to headline a card, but the unofficial rule is that you can't headline a card without a belt. So they slap belts on everything. Well, pay-per-view cards at least. Which is why the Poirier versus Diaz fight couldn't be the main event at any point. Having said, all the usual stuff they do about, watering down the weight classes or letting other people write about that, the UFC decided that they would put Valentina Shevchenko, everyone's favourite, my favourite of course, into the main event for the flyweight title against Sijara Eubanks, who is 3-2, I believe, in her career, on a one-fight winning streak, and missed weight in her last fight, didn't she? Or at least on Tough or something like that. I forget, but Joe Rogan said, I'm a commentator for the UFC and I don't know who this woman is. Firstly, it pisses me off because it's that constant need to coronate Valentina. Secondly, they took away Valentina versus Joanna, which is just stupid. We've got to push the fight up, so Joanna, who is supposed to be gaining weight to take this fight, I think going up in weight, there are people who just don't cut any weight, or rather choose not to cut any weight, but I think if you're going up in weight, the right way to do it is to try and pack on a bit of mass to do it. Not like Roy Jones' amount when he went up to heavyweight and then didn't have the speed when he came down again. But I think, there's more, plenty of consideration that goes into moving weight classes. And in the UFC, we're just like, can we bump your fight up to show Nate Diaz who's boss? Just who gives a fuck about this fight? People were actually excited about Valentina versus Joanna, and I think Joanna is the kind of fighter who can make Valentina have an interesting fight because she's aggressive and a combination puncher, and Valentina is a hang-back, lazy sort of fighter like Rose Namajunas. But no, can't have that. Can't have nice things because we've got to show Nate Diaz who's boss. I think it was Luke Thomas was talking about, you could just slap an interim title on Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman. That'd be fine. Why add this extra fight which isn't good? Add this extra fight but put it on the bottom end of the card. Don't offensively put it as the main event and try and convince people that Nate Diaz and Poirier aren't right, that the £160 title would work. And the £160 title, on the one hand, I'm like, watering down the divisions, meh. But on the other hand, we got 4 titles between about 20 women who are good at fighting. Don't really need to worry about watering down the deepest divisions in MMA. So yeah, make it 155, 165, and 175, or whatever we were planning to do. But God forbid that Nate Diaz be right about something, and God forbid that they agree for a moment. and Nate Diaz is a knobhead. Let's be fair about this. He drastically overestimates his worth. Takes 2 years out, comes back. The UFC are desperate to prove that he isn't moving the needle, even while he's moving the needle. Just both parties are morons here. They could be making so much money together. And this is what's really stupid about the whole thing. This combines two of my favourite ranting points. One is, the desperate need to get Valentina Shevchenko in the limelight fighting bums, or at least nobody's. And the second is, literally last week, I was saying, 230, that's weird. It's almost like every time Conor McGregor fights, there's this big push up to the McGregor fight, and rather than use him as the UFC's most valuable advertising asset, he's the guy getting eyes on these things, and they're just going, well, no, actually, let's put a fairly weak card under him so that no one sees anyone who might challenge for that. Well, Tony Ferguson's on the card, which is great, but generally, they're like, Khabib, he can go on the undercard of UFC 200, and then the next event is always like shit. Why would you not, when you got people's interest, be like, okay, next event is title fight between Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier. Winner gets McGregor if he wins. The people running the UFC are feckless. And I think it's more Endeavour than it is anyone else, because Dana White, when he was being asked about this by Brett Okamoto, there's a great interview. He is so clearly embarrassed to be trying to sell this Eubanks versus Valentina fight, and he's doing his best, but he can't make eye contact, and he's just like, oh, this is so shit. Oh, I mean, on the other hand, like, the other fights are pretty good, you know, but we've been under this, like, if you are pushing the idea that the headliner is everything, as they always have with, like, Conor McGregor and people like that, and a fighter's asking for a cut of the pay-per-views, that's what's holding up the John Jones thing at the moment. He wants a pay-per-view cut because he's actually a star, and they're like, well, but you're not a champion, so you don't get a cut of pay-per-views. If you've been arguing that all the way through, don't then try and sabotage your own pay-per-view by your own logic. It's just so unbelievably stupid. Anyway, that'll do news for this week, because fucked if I can be asked to talk about John Jones and other minor bollocks that happened. Let's do this Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. Fair warning, I've been working on my piece since Monday. I was like, oh, I'll do the important piece at the start of the week, so there's not like a rush towards the end of the week. It ran over like 2 days. I was really bored writing it. Like, I realise I'm so looking forward to this fight as a fan and as someone who wants to watch it, but I have serious McGregor fatigue. I have written so much about Conor McGregor in the last 2 years, even when he's not been fighting. I'm just tired of it. Like, it's writing about people when nothing is happening between. You know, if I'm writing about Donald Cerrone or someone like that, he's fighting every other month. There's always something new to talk about. Conor McGregor hasn't fought in MMA in 2 years. In the meantime, the best division in the world is moving on at a rate of knots, and he only has to fight one guy and then he can disappear for another 2 years. It's fucking disappointing, to be honest, that is how far we've got. Like, he only has to test himself once every 2 years. There are guys if he fought everyone in the top 10, 2, 3 maybe would beat him on any given night. And that's not me being like 2 or 3 are specifically bad matchups for him, but that's me being like, that those are the odds when you're defending the lightweight title. You know, RDA had a great run with the lightweight title, but bam, Eddie Alvarez came out of nowhere and just knocked him on his ass. Everyone who has defended that belt like 2 or 3 times loses it eventually because it's such a strong division. So that's one reason why I'm kind of bored of it, but I'm also kind of bored of it because I've just written so much about this dude. And the other thing about this fight is that they have almost no common opponents. Like, nothing there you can look at and go, oh, you know, oh, well, Conor McGregor fought someone a little bit like Khabib, or Khabib fought someone a little bit like... It's just... that is the intrigue, I suppose. You have 2 guys who are so known for one aspect of the fight game. You know, we're not... I wanted to say one-dimensional, but we're not really talking one-dimensional. You know, either of these guys... You know, Conor McGregor could go back to UFC 1 or UFC 20 or something like that and just smoke dudes with his jiu-jitsu. And the same is true with Khabib and his boxing. But they are still very skewed towards one aspect of MMA in what they prefer to do and where they have their success. So it is like the traditional striker versus grappler matchup, but also not. But in talking about this fight, you know, the first thing I wrote in my article was watch the feet. Always, always, always watch the feet. The parallels between Ronda Rousey and Khabib Nurmagomedov are legit. He does not cut the ring well. You know, you can watch him against Barbosa or Johnson or anyone that he was trying to get to the fence quickly. And, you know, the secret in... If you aren't particularly good at watching this stuff and you want to know, well, why is he good or bad at ring cutting? Because you can be very good at ring cutting and still take a long time to get the guy where you want him because the other guy's doing stuff right. But typically... If you are moving with the guy and he moves to your right, say, and you're in your orthodox stance and you step across with your right foot to meet him, that's cutting the ring. That's putting pressure on. That's, you know, stepping to obstruct his path. You know, you're opening yourself up a little bit more to get hit or, you know, to at least get into exchanges. But you are also, you know, that's the thing about ring cutting. You are using your presence. It's very hard to be elusive and use your presence at the same time. Bad ring cutting is any time you're like turning around the lead foot, pivoting. You know, pivoting has a great many uses, and you know, pivoting can be used offensively while cutting the ring. But I'm talking pivoting like when you have your lead foot out there and they move to your right and you turn around your lead foot to face them. Because what you've done there is, rather than if you step across with your right foot, you are moving to obstruct their path. You are putting pressure in the way of them. If you turn around that lead foot, the other side of your body is swinging away from them. You are removing the pressure. I mean, I wrote loads of this. I drew some diagrams in Finding the Art. I've got to write something new soon because, like, sports moved on. And to be honest, we're talking about new things. It's not as basic as it used to be. But that's the general truth. Like, standard pivoting really just opens space. If you're recutting the ring, that is. There's a ton of uses for pivoting. We're not specifically talking about those now. We're talking about cutting the ring. The other thing Khabib does is run straight past people, which is just against Barbosa. He literally runs past him with flying knees and dives at his legs too. This guy is not Chris Weidman or someone like that, where they've actually, they'll put you towards the fence, they'll cook you a little while, they'll maybe throw some punches or some low kicks, and then they'll get in on the hips and, you'll be on your ass. And that's not to say that he can't do that. Maybe he can. And this mirrors exactly what I was saying about Ronda Rousey coming up to that Holly Holm fight, or no, it wasn't specifically the Holly Holm fight. I was talking about killing the Queen, Ronda Rousey. I get people who remember the killing the Queen Ronda Rousey thing remember it because it came out before the Holly Holm fight, and basically I listed all the things that Holly Holm went on to do, but I also said specifically in that article I don't believe Holly Holm could do this. So I'm not trying to sell myself as a clairvoyant, but the same stuff we were talking about before that fight is the same stuff we're talking about, or I'm talking about with Khabib now. Absence of ring cutting is not proof that you can't cut the ring, but equally getting dudes to the fence regularly is not proof that you can, because you can get to the top levels of this sport without ever meeting someone who actually knows what to do when their back's to the fence, which is fucking bizarre, but also true. Guys who don't know that you need to fake one way, go the other, change direction, change level, and mix things up to actually get the opponent stepping before you step in that direction. And that's how you alleviate pressure and create openings to escape off the fence. Now, McGregor, he fought Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather, not a great ring cutter. A great many aspects of boxing, but really not a great ring cutter. But then Floyd's thing was just moving forward and keeping him moving and tiring him out. And that worked wonderfully, but it was a long old fight first. But in that fight, I was really pleased with McGregor's pivots and stuff like that and getting offline. He was doing very well at that until he got really tired, which is something that happens in all McGregor fights. That fight was so weird, the Mayweather one. People will get upset that we're looking into the Mayweather one rather than his last MMA fight. But for fuck's sake, it's been 2 years, and also feet. When we're talking about footwork, it's the same, regardless of where it is. It was weird because McGregor took on the Mayweather role, and Mayweather took on the bullying role, and everyone was like, McGregor's chance is the power, and then he came out and threw 70 punches around and half power ones too. So it was a very peculiar matchup. But the problem with McGregor has always been the heavy hitting style, the working on a hair trigger. He's always going forward, making stuff happen, and then ready to pull back and drop the left hand counter at any time. And that's what makes him so dangerous. But it is also a very labor intensive style which tires him out quite quickly. What's peculiar about this fight, of course, is that he could go forward. There's no reason he couldn't go forward. But with guys like Eddie Alvarez, he went forward, pressured them, and then he was strong enough to beat them in the clinch and shuck them out of it. Giving up clinches to Khabib Nurmagomedov is just something I can't see him wanting to do. So I'm expecting more of a mobile performance. Maybe, it's not off the table. He comes out and does exactly what he's done to every other opponent, puts Khabib on the fence, kicks his body, throws him off out of the clinch, and comes back with left hands when he reaches at him. But I really struggle to see that. That's probably the least likely outcome in my mind's eye. And that's the thing about this. On the one hand, they are so different in that McGregor is famous for fading and Khabib is famous for going the distance and just pounding on dudes. But equally, they both spend a lot of their time trying to exhaust the other man and overwhelm them. Khabib does that over a longer period of time, but McGregor, you can get distracted by the big power in the left hand, but a lot of what he does is just run people ragged. He comes out, he presses the pace, he kicks the body constantly, he's throwing high kicks and jumping kicks and shit like that, and then trying to punish the opponent whenever they come back. And if he can't catch them the first few times that they come back at him, he'll just keep hammering the body, and eventually they'll be very winded and reaching wildly for him. So they both have this thing where they try and overwhelm people. Just Nurmagomedov tends to last longer because, it's obviously a very high pace and a very grueling thing that he does, but it's a lot more possible to take breaks when you're on top of someone and controlling them. I'm not saying take breaks because he is always working, but like when he's in a smash pass or something like that and he's got the arm and the other guy's just trying to fight his arm off and he's just slapping them with small punches, he's getting a bit more of a breather than when McGregor's going forward trying to kick people in the body and always being ready to leap back and throw the left hand. So similarities, I mean, both of them place enormous value on, just firstly getting in the opponent's face and tiring them out with pressure and activity. Because while the Edson Barbosa and the Michael Johnson fights are bad examples of ring craft, they are very good examples of what a pace can do to someone in terms of just throwing all their plans out the window. I'm sure Michael Johnson and Edson Barbosa came in planning to circle. Edson Barbosa is just not a very good ring general, but Edson Barbosa is actually the worst ring general in the lightweight division. Can I have a break to slag off Edson Barbosa? I'll do that in a second, actually. But the amount of movement in those two fights, if you're cutting the ring well, you probably reduce that movement and you get the clinch a bit more. But the amount of running around the cage that Edson Barbosa and Michael Johnson did actively tired them out. So fair enough in that regard. But time to slag off Edson Barbosa just while I remember. But kicking generally is going to be a thinking point in this fight because McGregor has a very overlooked kicking game. It's very easy to get tied up in the spinny bullshit, which isn't always bullshit to be fair, but people get caught up in the spinning and the jumping. But the amount that McGregor kicks the body and at the head, to be honest, is very, very high. He drives such a high pace and people, and the left hand is always the one that connects big and hurts people. But he's constantly troubling people with those kicks. If you watch the Mendes fight, even Eddie, anyone basically, where he backs them up straight away, he digs the front kick to the body constantly, and he throws the left high kick to the head all the time just to keep their right forearm up. If their right forearm comes in to defend his left straight or parry or whatever, the left kick is going to hit him in the head. If their right forearm stays high and rigid to deal with the kick, he can sneak the left through all the time. If you want to watch that, watch poor Dennis Seaver fight him. It's just constant jumping, like bicycle kicks and left high kicks, and then left straights down the centre because Seaver's got his hand high and wide, because his problem has always been letting that hand sag, like when Donald Cerrone kicked his head off. But yeah, kicking is like a better for a forward-moving fighter. That's what McGregor does very well. He puts people to the fence and then he kicks them. Much more difficult to circle and kick unless you're fighting like a Nate Diaz type, where they're very side-on. They're in that boxing stance. They really only want to box. They're not going to walk straight down the centre of that kick if you keep circling and then kicking at the right time. Of course, Nate Diaz did then get his guard up and just walk McGregor down, and McGregor was getting caught on one leg trying to kick him because he was expecting him to be standing in that very side-on stance, waiting for punches. But kicking against wrestlers obviously very dangerous because they can catch it. The front kick to the body especially, the high kick a little bit less, but probably still, and low kicks generally, with the exception of very low kicks, as into the shin and calf below the knee, and linear kicks, the side kick he loves. He's used the oblique kick before. Those could actually be useful, especially while circling the cage. And again, shadows of the Ronda Rousey fight and Jones versus Rampage or Jones versus Vitor or anyone like that. If you slam the kick, like the oblique kick or the side kick less so because you tend to have to commit your weight a little bit more. The oblique kick, you throw the leg out in front of you and then put it down behind you so you can keep moving backwards a little bit better than if you pick up the lead leg, slam it down, and then you've got to put that foot down before you can move back again. The straight line kicks to the knee, and particularly I like more the thigh when we're dealing with like a really aggressive person. It's a sort of balancing act because the knee, they have to reach out a bit more if they want to try and catch it, which is very, very hard to do. But the thigh, slam the kick in there, straighten the leg out, throws the hips back, breaks the stance. They aren't going to get in on you before you pull the leg back and put it down and circle off. The Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey ones are the best example of that, but also Vitor versus Jones and Rampage versus Jones. If you slam that kick in on someone who's just plodding forward or running forward, you can throw their hips back and just ruin their stance completely before you move offline. I said in my article, like, there is this sort of movement to rebrand Khabib as an amazing striker. Cool that he does the shoulder roll, cool that he jabs and pulls back, but he still does this thing where he like throws something, realizes, oh shit, I'm in trouble, and his eyes go wide and he pulls his head straight back, or he turns his back and runs after he's done some kind of kick. Gonna tread on a few toes here, but actually it shouldn't be controversial. Al Iaquinta, not that good in the grand scheme of things. One of the best fighters in the world in terms of being in the UFC and probably being like top 20 material, but the idea that he's a top 10 fighter is pretty laughable, given who he's beaten and who he hasn't. And really, he only has the right hand in the wrestling. He was never a great boxer, even though he's been advertised as it. And he was squatting so low to deal with Khabib's takedowns preemptively that he was just giving the jab to Khabib. But if I were coaching this very rudimentary striker for the biggest fight of his life, and the main thing that I'm worried about, the main thing everyone's worried about, is the left hand, and not just the left hand, it's specifically where the left hand catches on the counter. Now, if you're a newbie to this podcast, or striking stuff in general, which is possible because this episode is going to have Conor versus Khabib in the title, a principle that you're going to learn from lots of martial arts, less so boxing, but lots of martial arts, is the open side and the closed side. If you are a fighter fighting with their left foot forward, an orthodox fighter, your open side is your right side, your closed side is your left side. And the closed side is the one where your back and your lead shoulder are going to protect you from a lot of stuff, even if you're working on sort of instinct. So think someone swings a big right hand at you. If you duck down to your right side, you can get down behind your shoulder line and your back quite easily. Think Floyd Mayweather. Obviously, he does it a bit more upright because he's had years and years to hone it into a very technical position. The stone wall or the Philly shell or the old slip and slide or whatever bollocks you want to call it. But shoulder rolling, hundreds of years old and still sound. If you think about, my favourite thing is to think about professional wrestling. Whenever someone takes a chair shot, they turn and they take it on the back. Part of that is the WWE not wanting to do headshots anymore because of Benoit and other stuff. But part of it is also because your back is a big meaty muscle mass, and it's, you can really take quite a stern shot on it without much damage or pain or anything. Meanwhile, when something comes in from the open side, something swings in from your right side if you're orthodox, very hard to turn down behind the right shoulder and the back. We're talking like a reverse shoulder roll. Possible, guys do it along the fence, along the ropes rather. Jersey Joe Walcott used to do it a lot. RDA's done it occasionally. Lots of guys fold down behind the right elbow, which is like an extension of that. But very, very tricky to do, especially if your feet are in a stance and not like level. So to take that example a bit further, let's say I am orthodox, the opponent's orthodox, they step in at me with jab or some silly bollocks. I take a slight step off to my right, so I'm on an angle, and I throw my right hand in from that angle over their shoulder. But as I said, it has to go over their shoulder. If they are awake, if they're competent and not tired, they should be able to get down behind their shoulder in time. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't happen. Stephen Thompson has knocked down dudes with that exact same counter over the shoulder. But if I were in the opposite stance and I did exactly the same step, but because we're mirrored now, I'm going to the other direction as the opponent throws their jab or their right hand, and I throw my left straight from the same angle but on the other side, they don't have their back and shoulder to hide behind. What they have is their glove, and when we're not boxing, that's not a very big surface. So you have a lot more vulnerability on that side, the open side. And for the same reason, when you're talking like Muay Thai or Taekwondo, they focus on kicking into the open side. Because if you're kicking the closed side, you're going to get the back and the shoulder and stuff. If you're kicking into the open side, you've got a great chance. Well, firstly, you're just smashing the arm. But if you're digging in with the ball of the foot or anything like that, you can get inside of that, or you can fold the arm into the head and kick through it if they're not, if they're not really rigid with it. It's basically taking advantage of the skeletal structure. If you're kicking into the back and stuff like that, bad. If you're kicking into the carapace in the face, great. I like to think of people as prawns. Like, if you're in a tight covering up guard with your head down and your forearms high and you're quite square, all the stuff in the middle, like the inside of the prawn, is what you want to get to. But obviously in a regular stance, it's more side on. So anyway, Conor McGregor's left hand generally comes in through the open side very well. He'll sneak it in the normal way, step slightly outside the lead foot or lean slightly out to the side of the opponent's lead shoulder and throw it straight down the middle, thread it down the middle. But that open side counter is really what messes people up. And you can watch Tenshin Nasukawa do it. You can watch Stephen Thompson do it. There's quite a few guys doing it now. But I mean, like I said, it's not new. It's just finding new popularity at the moment. Benny Leonard did the same thing from orthodox against Lou Tendler, and Lou Tendler was one of the very first famous southpaws. So guys worked it out pretty early on, but that was 1926 maybe. But we got it on film, and it's a really slick counter when you see it. It does not look 100 years old, that clip, which is why I use it so often. People cry about me using clips of old boxers, but I just particularly love that counter when Benny Leonard does it. So that's the problem with Conor McGregor. He's always going to be attacking to the open side, and that problem is really amplified if the opponent throws their right hand. If the more you throw your right hand at him, the more you are giving him that window. When you're pulling that, especially if you slightly overextend, he likes to step back and on that angle. It's not just cutting straight out to the angle, it's retreating into the angle and drawing dudes out. And, if you get caught reaching, it's very hard to get back into position. Firstly, you're at a mechanical disadvantage trying to defend yourself when he's punching into the open side anyway. But if you've already overextended first and you're trying to get back to position, you've got a very hard task ahead of you. If you watch the Mayweather fight, again, we're going back to the Mayweather fight, but if you watch the Mayweather fight, Mayweather was repeatedly able to land his right hand without risking that counter. He got caught early on by that uppercut, which was quite surprising. But generally, he did a very good job of always making sure he was close enough before he extended his hand, constantly walking McGregor down so that he wasn't reaching ahead of himself, and then he'd really step in and clinch after his right hands too, or duck under very low. What you don't want to be doing is what Eddie Alvarez was doing, and I had a while where I was double jabs work very well against people who give ground constantly. Maybe the double right straight would do, but Eddie Alvarez likes to throw the right straight, stand there and throw the right straight again, twice in a row or 3 times. He did it against Dustin Poirier in the most recent fight too, and he got cracked off it. So, the real balancing act. The jab and the double jab are going to work well against Conor McGregor if you're good at them, but again, I don't want to use Ally Quinta as a measuring stick for how good and educated your jab is. So anyway, how did I get onto that? Oh, okay, I was saying, with someone like Khabib, when you're dealing with such a disadvantage in the striking, I would be tempted to turn him southpaw, because then McGregor's power hand and his favourite counter, and really the whole thing everyone's scared of, becomes less of a natural exploit. It's not going into the open side. Khabib has shown himself competent with a shoulder roll. He knows to get down behind his lead shoulder. We're not talking Mayweather drawing the right hand onto the shoulder and coming back with counters, but we're talking about a guy who realizes that that's a great evasion to use after you've jabbed or whatever. So yeah, I mean, that would be just something I'd throw out there if you're dealing with someone, and especially if you want to get to a proper clinch, because the McGregor stance is very long, and the more in a southpaw versus orthodox engagement, you're really dealing with that lead foot and knee as a barrier too. Very good if you want to pick up single legs. Some guys feed the single, so they're just defending the single rather than risking the double leg. But if you want to get to a proper clinch, a little bit more difficult sometimes. Whereas if you go southpaw, you can just duck straight into it under the left hand or whatever. And if you want to see someone basically shut off McGregor's left straight, the Poirier fight's a great example. Just having that, he really overdid it. He put the right elbow right up in the path of the punch, and McGregor couldn't work him out. Started throwing these long loopy left hooks or left swings basically, and eventually got it behind the guard. But that was more to do with Poirier not realizing that he'd changed the path of his punch. If you are Khabib Nurmagomedov and you're looking to get in on the hips, every time he starts swinging that wide open punch, that's a great chance to get in. Something that I think I talked about in the article might have got cut because I was trying to keep under a word count, but I think Khabib should be kicking, because McGregor's got a nice long stance. A lot of his success is in his mobility and footwork, whether he's on offense or defense. Is that springing back. The fight with Mendes, when his knee is completely shagged, you can see that he's completely off with his timing on the skip back counter, and he finally gets it once he's already exhausted Mendes. But early on, he's just getting cracked and missing counters constantly. And part of that is Mendes being a fast guy, but also part of that is that his knee was not in good shape for that fight. So if you can mangle his legs a bit, you've got a good chance of slowing him down and throwing his timing off on those retreats. He's got a very, I want to say fast twitch. He's white explosive, Gaelic explosive. But he relies a lot on very quick twitch movements, a lot of work from like the calves and stuff. And if you can sort of like jar his knees or get some swelling in his thighs, you might have a good chance of slowing him down. But more than that, cutting the ring on someone, if they're going to circle out when you get them close to the fence, as soon as you get them close to the fence, kick the trailing leg. Works a lot of the time, like against very good fighters like Machida and Demetrius Johnson and people like that. They get caught with the trailing leg and it slows them down. And the other thing is that you can just step in with a lead hook if you just put the kicking foot down, and then suddenly you're in an exchange or a clinch, which is great. Again, read the article at Unibet, but I've done 2 articles. One's called like Halting Khabib, the path to McGregor's success, or McGregor's path to success, or whatever, and the other one's from Khabib's point of view. But let's talk about the clinch. And if you want to learn more about this specific clinch work of Nurmagomedov, BJJ Scouts videos, I did reference them in the article. If it gets cut, I have referenced them. Apologies if it gets cut, but I'm not going to pretend this is my own knowledge. But back in the day, we used to talk about Cain Velasquez using the single underhook pin, and then it turns out that that's just the AKA strategy, full stop. But the single underhook pin was just one underhook along the fence, post your head on their under their head to stand them up, and then you can punch with like short arm punches, and from there, as Scout demonstrated, like you can get the idea is to lock your hands and start using body locks to take them down or throw them on their hands, and so on. Daniel Cormier did it against Frank Mir. My favorite example from a few years ago was that Big Nog had like a little career resurgence by just getting to the clinch along the fence and using the single underhook pin. Like, it was just a great way of shutting down his opponent's options. Against Frank Mir the second time, he beats Mir up on the feet, which is really weird. And then outworks him in the clinch too, despite Mir being significantly bigger. But the way that that's traditionally been stalled out is by using bicep control. And you can see this in the McGregor-Diaz fights. In the first fight, Diaz, there's a good bit where he knees him in the body or something like that, and then he hits him with a load of punches with the head pin, the single underhook and the head pin along the fence. And the crowd's going wild because he's taking all these unanswered blows. But in the rematch, he was prepared for that position, and in fact, his corner calls for him to go to the clinch to get breathers, because he's McGregor. He's almost always breathing hard by the third round or the second round or whatever, because he's punching so hard. But he'll let Diaz step in on him, and then he'll take an overhook on one arm and just pull him back onto the fence, and then use the bicep tie on the other arm. If you can control the free arm, you can really frustrate their efforts. Junior Dos Santos versus Cain 1 and 2 are great examples of it working well, but if you, as in the position working well, but if you can stifle that free hand, you can make them make them change position and do stuff, because the onus is on them to make something happen. If you're just pressing someone against the fence and you can't get off clean shots with your free hand, the referee's going to break you eventually, and then you're back to square one. And typically, like I said, Scout's done a video on this, but my favorite example was Verdum back in the day. Nogueira pinned him against the fence, did really well for the first part of the fight, but Verdum was just controlling that free hand at the bicep or at the wrist, and then finally Nog gets a little bit frustrated, swings a bit wide, and Verdum just punches under, gets double underhooks, and turns him onto the fence. It's this you either have to change position or you have to. Or guys start putting more effort into trying to hit, and the more effort you try and hit them with, the more you're going to move your body while you do it, and then you're giving up that control and pressure that you had before. Same thing happened with Cain versus Verdum, and Demetrius Johnson does this too, but where you have the overhook on their underhooking arm, you control their free arm, and as you get space, you post on the free bicep or whatever to push that side away. You step out to that side and you whip that whizzer from a whizzer into a collar tie. And then if you're Demetrius Johnson or Verdum, you get the double collar tie and you start trying to knee. But McGregor did this against Diaz in their second fight. He would use the post on the free arm, and then he'd step out through that space, whip it through into a collar tie with the whizzering arm, and then he'd throw the elbow nice and high into the scar tissue along Nate's head because Nate is a bleeder, and immediately just cut him right open. He did it a couple of times in the fight. It was actually brilliant. So the guy knows the position. He knows what he's supposed to be doing, but obviously Nurmagomedov is so strong there, and it'll be very interesting to see what he can do. But again, like the wonderful thing about putting the hand in the bicep, and this is something that Edwin Hazlitt talked about in his book, which is a book on boxing, which is weird enough, but if you stuff a punch at the bicep, that's the most effective way to stop a punch. The closer your block gets to the target, the more of that blow you're going to absorb. The closer your blocking is done at the root of the strike, the more you can muffle their punch and make it completely ineffective rather. But again, watch Scout's video, because there's another. One of the other interesting things is that if you can stall out that hand, guys will drop on the single leg or the high crotch or something like that. Normally the single leg. And from there, you're into much more normal territory for takedown defense. You can use the Travis Brown elbows, or if you're that way inclined, or you can do the BJ Penn thing, try and stuff the head to the other side, look for the switch. You can do the Aldo thing, run out into space and limp leg out. That's the one that Scout demonstrates in his study. But you're back into a more orthodox area with a much less disadvantaged position. Now, the other thing about that is that while he did stall out Diaz from that position in the second fight, Diaz had tremendous success freeing both hands from that position, using his head to pin him up against the fence, taking the underhook out. So this is like the classical way of breaking a clinch in boxing. You put your head underneath the opponents to stand them up and create space between your chests. You pull your chest back and your hips back, and then you weave your arms out. You just slide them out. A little bit harder in boxing gloves, but Diaz did that, and every time he did it, he was able to bang the body with both hands, and McGregor was feet level along the fence, which is a position that even Conor McGregor isn't going to be able to hit you very hard from, compared to, when he's in his stance and swinging with force. And John Jones obviously has done fantastic work with this in recent years, against Daniel Cormier, against Glover Teixeira. He'll use his head to stand them up, stretch out the midriff, and to take them out of their stance and take the power away, and then dig punches to the body. The whole Glover Teixeira fight, they were like, oh my god, he's in the kitchen with Glover Teixeira, and you're like, well, no, it's not like he's trading punches with him. He's put him in a very bad position to throw punches from, and Jones's feet are still, under him, digging the punches in. Especially if you can get your head, if you can lean on them properly doing it, you can really get some force in from your legs, where they're being pushed upwards the entire time and not able to dig their legs in and get some power from the floor. So I'd like to see Khabib do that. I'd like to see him get into the clinch, free his arms, hit the body, dive back in on a leg, come up on the clinch. And I think that would be we're not talking like Cain Velasquez, because Cain Velasquez didn't have that nice body uppercutting infighting style, but he did have the style of break, throw a few punches, get back in on the leg, come up to the clinch proper, punch, break, punches, leg, clinch. And that, that's the standard way of keeping pressure on a guy when you can't get stuff working. If you're not getting the stuff going from the clinch, you drop on the leg. If they start defending the leg, you come back up to the clinch. There's nothing stopping you from going between the two and eventually catching them. So, as long as you're aware of their escapes and stuff. So, that's the sort of area where I'd like to see Khabib work. Get the clinch, free your arms, punch the body, or knee the body from the clinch if you can, because McGregor's gas tank is so susceptible, and obviously Diaz and Mayweather have both shown that body work really gets to him, and then drop on the hips or the leg, drive back into the fence, come up on the clinch, free the arms, do it again, and eventually tire him out. And it won't take long in terms of body shots. He doesn't take him that well at all. When we're talking the ground, this is the big question mark, because we haven't seen an awful lot of McGregor on the ground, and what we have seen has been massively overanalyzed, because that's just what we do. There was a nice overhook X guard sweep against Nate Diaz, but again Nate Diaz was sort of stumbling over the top of him at the time, and it was right at the end of the round too. But the thing about Nurmagomedov is that he's very much in the sort of Fedor mold of what I used to call I still call dynamic ground and pound versus static ground and pound. Static ground and pound is like you hold the position and you hit, and he still does plenty of that. Like the wrist riding from Turtle and stuff. The whole AKA team doesn't put the hooks in from the back generally, and just likes to ride on people and hit. But dynamic ground and pound is something that it's a little bit not rarer, but you don't see as much of it. The most obvious dynamic ground and pound is it's basically moving position while striking, or posturing up and delivering a dynamic strike, even if you're going to lose or concede some position somehow. So nice example of basic dynamic ground and pound would be the throw by pass into the punch, which is a Fedor favourite. All of this is Fedor favourites. He's the king of dynamic ground and pound. But Dan Henderson did it against Bubba Lou. You've seen dozens of these where it's guys getting the feet, throwing them past and coming in with the punch. But another example would be, say, Fedor versus Herring or something like that, where he gets past the guard, and anyone else in any division would be clinging for life. You've passed the guard, that's the hard bit done. You are winning the fight. You're being told by your corner you're winning the fight. Do not give up that position. But Fedor would pop up to knee on belly, throw 2 hard punches, crack the guy twice as the guy scrambled back to guard, but it'd be an open guard, and then he'd throw the legs past and dive in with the punch again. And that's what I mean by dynamic ground and pound. You are making bigger punches happen to give up, but giving up some space in the process. And this is what Khabib does. Like, if you watch him get put in like knee shield by Michael Johnson or anything like that, he doesn't get held in place. And he does the same from side control. He'll hop up to knee on belly or knee on belly and knee on throat, which I love that position. It's Minoru Suzuki stuff. But he'll hop up to there and he'll stand and punch down. And the dude will maybe get his legs back in front, but he'll take like 3 punches from the ceiling to do that, And that's what I mean by dynamic ground and pound. And Khabib has that for days. But the other thing that Khabib does very well is punish dudes for building up, basically, along the fence. If you are trying to wall walk against Khabib, that's a nightmare. He does that thing what we used to call laming it out, where you sit on the legs. You grapevine the leg at the calf and you stretch it out so your hips are like on top of their knees. So you're not really mounted and you can't really do much, but you are sort of winning and you're holding them down. Mayhem Miller did it to Jake Shields. Jake Shields did it to everyone. George St. Pierre did it to Michael Bisping, and Michael Bisping immediately started appealing to the referee. But Khabib actually works from there. He'll put one hand on the throat and he'll get his head below the opponent's, and then he'll come up with uppercuts. One of the few good applications of uppercuts I've seen on the ground, because when do you have the opponent hunched over in the ground positions? You could say under the arm in the turtle maybe, but there's very few positions where uppercuts really work well on the ground. But the Dagestani's him and is it Makachev, the guy who got the awesome armbar the other month? They're very good at using that position to tip people on their side as well. Makachev got that grapevine position, pulled his opponent's arm out, sat him on his side, and moved into a smash pass. And by smash passing generally is like a philosophy, but smash pass in this sense we mean the position of the legs, the knees pressed together and pointing to one side. Which is some guys call it the leg mount, some guys call it a weave sometimes, but a weave typically people are talking about the arm going through the middle, and the weave is also with the knee splitting too. But if you can mount the knees like that with them basically with the opponent on one side or their hips on one side, that's a very, very strong position where they have to do a lot to sort of improve their position. And one of the common reactions is to get up on the elbow and try and pull your hips back from underneath the opponent. And if you do that, they reach through, catch that arm behind the back, smash you down on it. And that arm behind the back stuff is just what makes Khabib so dangerous along the fence. Because along the fence, guys will reach and try and post up and get up off their hand anyway. And you can watch people like Phil Davis and Jacare grab Kimuras on that free arm, or the posting arm rather, because you know where it's going to be. It's like, I was talking about spiraling inward and knowing where the opponent's lead foot is from an open guard engagement in my most recent article. In fact, it's the Conor McGregor one on this Unibet series. I used the Henry Cejudo example. He spirals inside of Wilson Hayes' lead foot every time on the feet, and then he knows where Wilson Hayes' lead foot is going to be, so he steps outside it and lands the right straight and knocks him down. Knowing where someone's going to place something means that you're already ready to attack it. You can just go bam straight off the bat. And Khabib just grabs the arm across the back and folds guys down on it, like one arm man pass style, and he does it really, really well. And that's getting so hot right now. If you watch Kevin Lee against Edson Barbosa as well, he was doing it a different way. He was doing the gift wrap, which is the arm around the back of the head. But that's so powerful, and especially if you can hold dudes there and hit them with the free hand. Well, that is why it's so powerful. You can hit them with the free hand. Passing with the one-arm man and things like that in jiu-jitsu is strong, but it's not as strong as if that free hand could be punching dudes in the face. So I'll be very interested to see what McGregor can do to deal with that situation if he gets there, because Edson Barbosa and Michael Johnson had no idea. So I'm not entirely sure what your best course of action is from there. I think I'd almost prefer, if I were McGregor, to be off the fence. You know, the fence is great for using to stand up, but some guys are just very good along the fence, and that's when you want to work out in the open. If you watch Ken Shamrock versus Tito Ortiz, there's a weird one. He was terrified of being put on the fence from the guard, so he would swing his leg out wide onto the fence and push himself around and turn himself all the way around. It was one of the very few cool things that you could say Ken... Well, actually, he did a couple of cool things. One of the few successes that Ken had in those 3 fights was turning himself off the fence a couple of times with that technique. It could be useful here. I think trying to kick him out to range... I'm always a fan of up kicking in the chest. I think that's tremendously underused, but elbows from the bottom are so important. I think the main problem is that it's very hard to get Khabib in a traditional guard. He's so active and he's constantly moving. You're not going to catch him in closed guard, which is why I'd love to see him against Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson very good at putting the feet on the hips, trapping dudes in his closed guard, well, not closed guard, but in his full guard, putting the feet on the hips and applying the elbows, but also very good at, rubber guard, but also very good at inverting and going for leg locks and things like that. And I think that would be a great strategy against Khabib, because if you get a guy down on a hip, he could not hit nearly as well as if he's based on his knees or his feet. With the exception of Andrei Arlovski versus Peter Pano, where he gets put in a leg lock, and then there's a break because there's an illegal kick to the face or something like that, and John McCarthy or Herb Dean, whoever it is, steps back, and Andrei Arlovski's looking at the referee, and immediately punches Peter Pano in the face, before Peter Pano's oh, we're fighting again. It's really funny. But yeah, put him in leg entanglements, see if you can slow him down that way. I'm talking the Edson Barbosa, Tony Ferguson style. Just spin upside down, close your legs around his, maybe up kick him illegally. Just see what you can do to stop him from getting into positions where he can hit. And the other thing I'd like to see I'm fascinated to see, is how well McGregor can use the turtle, because I think the turtle really has a place against Khabib, but I think you've got to be really careful with it, because he likes to grab that wrist and ride on you, and if you get stuck in the turtle, you're just going to eat punches forever. But Abel Trujillo did a good job of getting up from the turtle and using the attempted mat returns by Khabib to roll through on a Granby. But more than that, there are just dudes who you don't want to be in guard or on your back against, like George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre, until Michael Bisping, everyone who'd given up their back to him had eventually gotten out. He would put the hooks in, and we would, I think I mentioned this before, but the reason AKA guys like to ride on their wrist and hit from the back in the turtle is because as soon as you put the hooks in, you get a good chance of being put on the bottom while you're on the back, and then eventually they'll turn into you. George St. Pierre was terrible at finishing from the back. He'd put the hooks in, get the back position, and then his opponent would survive for a little while and then turn out. Happened with Dan Hardy, Thiago Alves, all sorts of dudes. And it was preferable to being put on your back and smashed by him. And Nick Diaz, in their fight, anytime he was put in guard, he would open his guard, kick off George's chest, and turn to the turtle. And then George would go to the turtle, try and control him from the turtle. Nick would quad pod up on his hands and feet and, bent over. And George would switch to the front headlock, and then Nick would be, he would scramble out, or he would crawl to the fence and build up and try and separate the wrists that way. So it'd be very interesting to see what he can do with the turtle in this fight. I think the turtle is a tremendously underrated position in MMA. And a lot of guys' answer to being in the turtle is to Granby roll back to guard, which, if you went to the turtle to get out of guard, is just back to step one. And a lot of guys don't have a lot more than that. And of course, the nice thing about building up from the turtle, as opposed to trying to hit a technical stand-up from your guard or your side, is that he's not going to be able to reach around your back and flatten you on that arm. You're still going to be facing the ground with both hands towards the ground. But anyway, that's just musings. I have no idea what McGregor can do on the ground to get back up or to prevent Khabib from doing what he normally does. Right, we talked for an hour about that fucking fight, which I said I was too bored to recount. But yeah, I have no idea who to pick. I'm just a little bit sad that when this is done, if McGregor wins, he's going to disappear for another 2 years. If he loses, he'll be back in 3 months and we get the fight again, which is awesome. But it always makes me sad when this sort of stuff, when we have the big fight, and then you realise this is the best division in the world. There are so many dudes in it, but we're not going to see the title defended for another year or whatever. Yeah, and then poor old Tony Ferguson is stuck fighting Anthony Pettis on the card. And, Sod's Law would say that he's finally got this big showing and he's supposed to be like the next in line for whoever wins in the main event, but he'll suddenly lose to Anthony Pettis, who hasn't been able to rub 2 wins together recently. But, that's all stuff to look forward to. I was going to do some questions. I was going to talk about the rest of the card. I was going to talk about Ryzen and shit, but we're, pretty much out of time. I will be back on... Well, actually, do you know what? My wife's away this weekend, so I have free time to get drunk and belligerently live tweet. So if you want to join me on that, Twitter's JackSlackMMA. If you want to join the Patreon and get the Opium War episodes, and we're going to have the new Muhammad Ali episode coming soon, get on that. It makes it possible for me to do these podcasts. If you want to read what made me bored of writing about McGregor, buy the book Notorious. Make sure you read the pre-fight articles on unibet.com. And if you have an email to send to the podcast, fightsgonebipodcast@gmail.com. Also, buy your fucking merch. Blacksplosive t-shirts, Juice to the Tits t-shirts, his Fistic Majesty t-shirts, and Boxed Up t-shirts. All available. Go to fightprimer.com. It's all there. I'm your boy Jack Slack. I've somehow made myself excited for this fight again. Right, let's go. Conor bless. Khabib smash.